Start the recording. Excellent. So a very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at this. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting session and of course important as well. My name is Dr. Anjali Shah. I am a woman of Indian origin with dark long hair and greenish eyes. I am your chair for today, and I am here as co-chair of the UK Research Staff Association. And with them, I represent researchers on the Concordat Executive Group and the Concordat Steering Group. And of course, with these Concordats that we are discussing today, equality, diversity, inclusion runs throughout them. We are delighted that Wellcome did so much work collecting information on what's happening with researchers and on equality, diversity, inclusion. It's now time to start taking action at a number of levels. We have two speakers with us today. I'm going to start by introducing Tom Rowe, who works on policy at Universities UK. And Tom, thank you so much for your work. Tom has published a terrific report entitled Attracting and Retaining International Talent. Tom, if you wouldn't mind popping that link into the chat box, and then I'll hand over to you to tell us a bit more about your work.
Is it okay if I pop the link in after, just because I can't quite find it right now? But I can share the slides.
I'll link for you while you do your presentation. I'll do it.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm just going to share some slides and present the findings of the report. So bear with me 1 second. Okay, can everyone see that? Is that good? Cool. So hi everyone, my name is Thomas Rowe, and as Anjali sort of introduced me, I'm a policy intern at Universities UK, and I work on the immigration policy programme. And recently we published a report back in May looking at attracting and retaining international researchers to the UK. And in this report, we develop a career stages framework where we sort of identify immigration and visa obstacles for researchers at different stages of their careers. So for each group, we recommend priorities for immigration reform to try and make sure that we can continue to attract diverse researchers from different stages of their careers and from different backgrounds. And we'll be sharing these findings with the Home Office. So what we did was we sought feedback from our members, university staff and HR representatives to try and get a better understanding of these visa and immigration obstacles. And we developed this career stages framework to sort of acknowledge the fact that what an individual will prioritise when they're looking to move to a new destination or settle in a new country will very much depend on their circumstances, which are likely to change as they progress throughout their careers. So by talking to our members, we identified the following key priority areas, which is firstly, attracting early career researchers, secondly, attracting mid-career researchers, and then finally retaining international researchers once they've, so, you know, providing that ongoing support once they're already in the country. So to sort of start with the first group, early career researchers, in the report, we define this group as those who are, we include those who are undertaking their PhD, as well as those who have sort of within 5 or 6 years of their first research appointment. And we combine these groups on the basis that they most likely have overlapping priorities and experiences. They've not yet established full independence. Their needs most commonly relate to access to funding, development, or development of their research skills and opportunities for career progression. So unsurprisingly, the member feedback in terms of what are the biggest barriers to attracting these groups is that it's primarily financial. So our visa costs are amongst the most expensive in the world, and this is in part due to the immigration health surcharge, which costs £624 per year and per person. The total cost of this has to be paid for upfront, so someone coming for 5 years would have to pay £3,120 upfront. This was very much a key source of frustration amongst our members, and you know, it's the first thing on pretty much everyone's list in terms of major obstacles when it comes to recruiting international staff. And it's, you know, the fact how expensive our visa costs are was sort of emphasised in a Royal Society paper back in 2019, which shows that the upfront cost for a skilled worker visa, which is one of the main routes into the country for researchers, was over 5 times higher than the average of other leading science nations. Another issue that was sort of brought to our attention is the lack of career security in a sector which is often highly competitive. And based on member feedback, there wasn't always a clear pathway for early career researchers to bridge those gaps between posts or institutions, which can result in anxiety over what might happen once a fixed term contract comes to an end. So our suggestions on how to overcome some of these challenges was firstly, quite simply, to undertake a benchmarking exercise and review those visa application costs, make sure that we're at least in line with our international competitors. And if we want to be sort of world leading, then why not try and be more competitive on the grounds of costs? And a key way of sort of reducing that upfront financial burden would be enabling applicants to pay the immigration health surcharge over a series of staggered monthly payments rather than having to pay the total costs upfront, which we see as needlessly prohibitive. And finally, we suggest providing more support for early career researchers on career pathways. And we see the Great Campaign website, which is a recent project launched by UKRI, as a sort of one-stop shop resource to provide information on things like funding and visas, and basically just a resource for international researchers to come to sort of navigate before coming to the UK. We sort of see this as a very potentially useful resource, and it can help provide some of that clarity before coming to the UK. And I'll put the link to that website in the chat afterwards, because I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but it's definitely a useful, potentially useful resource. Secondly, so looking at the second group, which is attracting mid-career researchers, and we define this group as those who have, begun establishing themselves, they've begun developing independence and publishing great works. And we sort of focused on this group through the lens of, well, we sort of generalized that mid-career researchers are more likely to have family compared to early career researchers. They're more likely to be prioritizing settling down and family stability and well-being. So we looked at some of the issues that come when it comes to bringing over family to the UK. And again, there's significant financial costs, and you can see this in the table on the right. The total cost for a family of 4 to come over on a skilled worker visa would amount to £15,880, and that's the total cost up front. We also looked at some of the immigration rules, some of which are needlessly restrictive, particularly the sole responsibility requirement. This only allows a single parent to bring over their child to the UK in limited circumstances. So, for example, it doesn't recognise families where couples might be divorced or split up, but both still retain responsibility for childcare. It doesn't recognise situations where parents are together but working in separate countries, and it disproportionately impacts women who are less likely to be able to leave their children. So we see this as needlessly restrictive and not accommodating of diverse family structures. So what we recommend to overcome some of these challenges is firstly to review dependency visa costs, reduce that upfront financial burden, and again, enabling the immigration health surcharge to be paid for over a series of staggered payments would help for researchers with large families as well. We also suggest reviewing and reforming the sole responsibility requirement, making sure removing that needless red tape and making it more inclusive to diverse family structures. And finally, we suggest providing practical information for families looking to settle in the UK. And again, we see the Great Campaign website as a potentially useful resource here to provide information on things like housing, schools, and support for childcare. We think these soft factors can't be underestimated. These things that exist outside the professional and research space are also very important when it comes to attracting researchers. So the final group, retaining international researchers, was not originally an area we were looking at, but our feedback from members was that there was a lot of ongoing issues and a need to provide that sort of ongoing support. So not just getting people into the country, but making sure that people have the necessary support to remain, should they choose to. And we looked at particularly indefinite leave to remain and the costs and requirements there. So the upfront cost to apply for indefinite leave to remain is £2,389. There are extra costs for priority processing. Researchers will have to meet a minimum salary threshold of £33,000. Their families will have to meet their minimum salary thresholds. So there's a lot of things that could potentially go wrong. And one of the key issues that was highlighted to us was there's a current mismatch between researchers on global talent visas and other visas in terms of being able to apply for indefinite leave to remain. So someone on a global talent visa can apply after 3 years as one of the perks, I guess, of the visa, which is great, but unfortunately their family won't be able to until after 5 years. So there's this 2-year period where potentially, you know, the family could be separated because these visas don't align. And then the final issue is we heard instances from members of situations where researchers are having to reapply for a visa when transferring from one institution to another, particularly when their original visa was linked to sponsorship at a specific institution. So that means they'll have to pay the same fees again and go through the same bureaucratic hurdles. And we just think that this is we suggest that firstly we suggest bringing in those visas in line when it comes to reviewing the indefinite leave to remain requirements. So making sure that those on global talent visas and their families can remain in the country at the same time. And then secondly, we think there should be a system in place that enables visa costs to be transferred across institution. So it saves an individual's visa application details, even when perhaps their visa is linked to sponsorship at a specific institution. So that was a quick run through of the findings of my report, and there's a link to the full report there, and I'll make sure to put it in the chat. I think maybe it already is, but you can see my contact details there along with my colleagues Harry. So if you want to get in touch with any of us about any of these issues, then please feel free, and I will stop presenting there. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Tom, for finally recognising what has been such a source of stress for our amazing batch of international researchers who are supporting research in the UK. I know I've been told that at Oxford, about half of our researchers are not from the UK. And so whenever I've mentioned your work to them, it's been so warmly received. It's about time we recognise, as Louise says, the incredibly high costs to researchers and their families to come and work here. And given that the government has got this very an ambitious aim, you know, to increase investment, research and development to 2.4% of GDP by 2027, but the fact that we need an extra 150,000 researchers. Just let me step back a minute and go back to the housekeeping now that everybody's in the room, just to let you all know that we are recording this session and it will be made available later. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat box. If that is problematic, then please use the reaction button at the top to let me know that you would like to ask a question. For networking purposes, etc., everyone should be able to see your name. But thank you, all of you, very well trained by earlier sessions today. You've kept your cameras and microphones off while the panel is speaking. So, Tom, there are comments coming in, but a couple of questions. How has the report been received by government and other stakeholders so far?
Yeah, so we have been presenting the report to a wide range of external stakeholders. So we've had meetings with UCEA, UHR, BAYES, UKRI, and they've all been supportive of the recommendations in the report. We've had positive feedback, and crucially, we haven't been told that we've sort of missed anything obvious. And I think BAYES are interested in looking at immigration health surcharge costs and collecting evidence in that area, which we've provided some qualitative examples from when we were writing the report. We collected some stories which are in the report about researchers overcoming some of these challenges. In terms of with government, we have a contact at the Home Office who's been setting up a meeting between us and policy leads to go through these findings and talk about some of the recommendations. We were meant to meet last week, but unfortunately had to be rescheduled to later this week because of COVID cases. So but yeah, we're still optimistic that this will be a constructive meeting, and looking forward to hearing what they have to say. But unfortunately, I can't really say more about that at this point.
Okay, and very briefly, because I do want to move on to Diego, Any insights into trends on attracting international researchers to the UK at the moment?
So one of my colleagues at UKI has recently published a report looking at trends in recruiting PGR students, and again, I can post that link in the chat afterwards. But she's found that although the UK is still very attractive for PGR students, we've been stagnating since 2013. Meanwhile, countries like Germany and Canada have continued to grow. So even though we're still ahead, we're losing ground, and we can't really be complacent in this area. Also, because of Brexit, we're seeing early evidence that numbers of EU staff are going down. This has kind of been balanced out with an increase in numbers of non-EU staff being recruited. I think there's more focus in non-EU countries, but yeah, I think there is that sense that that's a trend that's likely to continue. But yeah.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And yeah, I've asked for hard data from Oxford. Hopefully it will be coming, but I have heard word that people think that numbers might have increased, but perhaps not from the EU. So it'll be really interesting to unpick what is happening with those trends. Thank you so much, Tom. If you could post 2 links, we've put the link to your report in the chat box already, but the GREAT campaign is one thing, and then the report that your colleague just published on trends in PGR students, that would be very helpful. Okay, moving on to Diego, who is, I need to check your title, Diego, but Diego works at the Wellcome Trust. He's Head of Research and Funding Equity, Culture, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, CD. I don't know if you call it that or SEDI or...
Definitely SEDI, not CD, please. Yeah.
That sounded very wrong. I'm sorry. So yes, over to you, Diego. Tell us more about your work in the EDI area.
Sure. Let me just get this. So thanks very much for the introduction, Anjali. And oh gosh, come on, computer. And yeah, thanks, Tom, for your thoughts and your work on attracting and retaining international researchers. So once I get this actually going. So as Anjali mentioned, my name is Diego Baptista. I'm the head of research and funding equity within the wider culture, equity, diversity, and inclusion team. My pronouns are he, him. For those that don't have video or are not seeing this, I'm a brown man with a mustache wearing a multicolored shirt in an office. So before I get started, I kind of wanted to talk about what we mean when we say diverse researcher or diverse research communities. What do we actually mean here? So we could be, on one hand, talking about the research experience and background in a technical sense that people have. So you might have physicists, chemists, microbiologists, and medical health professionals coming together to all solve a particular problem. Yes, this is important. This is how great research gets done, and interdisciplinarity is an essential part of how research is done. I don't think funders are the best yet at figuring out how to incentivize interdisciplinary research, but Wellcome is certainly trying. What I mean when I'm talking about diverse research communities is the actual people who are doing the research. So yes, your training and experience is important, but additionally, I think your experience as a human being and how you've developed in the world will play a role in how you might solve a particular solution. And more importantly, the problems that you might be interested in solving. So just wanted to kind of put that out there and be very clear about it. I'll go through first Wellcome's mission, and then my team and Wellcome's DEI or EDI strategy, and then some of the projects that we have in train or thinking about. So Wellcome's mission, for those of you that don't know, we're a charity that, or a foundation that supports science to solve the urgent health challenges facing everyone. So the health challenges I'll talk about, and that everyone is important, right? How do you tap into people that you don't have relationships with and build relationships with them that are trusting so that foundations like charity, foundations like Wellcome can support science that's actually going to impact and benefit those people. So we have 3 new health challenge areas, which you might have heard of. They broadly fall within the remits of mental health, climate health, and infectious disease. And then, you know, what Wellcome is known for is discovery research. So there's still a large part of our portfolio that is looking at kind of blue skies research outside of the health challenge areas, but also including them. So we have our mission statement. We have our challenge areas and discovery research. And then we have this vision that's supported by an underlying principle. So integral to achieving Wellcome's vision and these areas of research is the promotion of a sustainable, innovative, open, diverse, and inclusive research culture to enable people and ideas to thrive. So that's a really lofty statement. How does a funder do this? Part of it is setting the ambition that we do want to do this, and then now we're at the point of how do we actually implement some of these programs. So as we were building this statement, we thought, okay, an important step in achieving this vision in line with this principle will be thinking about Wellcome's decision processes and broader grants management. So how do we promote the inclusivity and equity in our funding? So that's how our money is delivered and then who that money is delivered to. Ensure the fairness of our decisions, so how Wellcome is making funding decisions itself, and then how we can use both of those things to positively influence research culture. To do this, we developed what we've called a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. And before I go into it, I'll talk briefly about why we've developed it. So one is to deliver on those lofty ambitions, and one reason to do this is because it's a moral case, right? You can say this is the right thing to do. Wellcome should be doing these things because it's good for people. There's also what I like to call the business case, which is this actually makes research better. If we deliver on some of these ambitions, the research that is produced will not only be more impactful, but people will have bought into it a little bit more as the research is being delivered. But realistically, it's really important to have a practical case. So if you don't have a plan for how you're going to have measurable objectives in EDI in general, it's really difficult to move organizations and cultures. Like you can move people's hearts and minds, and you can move some of the money through a business case. But if you don't have practical steps for how you're going to get there, you're never actually going to achieve what you want. This now leads me into the strategy itself. So I'll tell you about the very lofty commitments that we have, some of the more detailed goals that are kind of designing some of the activities, and then some of the activities that we have in place. So our very lofty commitments. We have 3 ambitious goals. So by 2031, Wellcome staff will be representative of the places we work, able to be themselves and supported to be their best. We have what I call goal 2. It's people funded by Wellcome will be more representative of the global population, able to be themselves and supported to be their best. And then we have goal 3, which is by 2031, all Wellcome funded research will be inclusive in both design and practice to help drive better science and more equitable health solutions. So my team, which is thinking about funding equity and research equity, as nodded to in my job title, are these latter 2 goals. So goal 2 is funding equity. Our funding is more representative of the global population, and goal 3 is research equity. So broadly, our remit is how can we make Wellcome be an inclusive funder, and then how can we ensure that Wellcome is funding inclusive research. In the interest of time, I'll only tell you about kind of the short-term goals on that left side, so how we can be an inclusive funder. So our short-term goals, we have a handful of them, and I can talk at high level on some of the projects that are in place or will be in the short term. So one thing that we hear from the community here in the UK is you have to be able to collect data around people's diversity characteristics to understand where in a particular process you might have inequities. So this is one of the first things that the team has been working on for a long time, is how do we collect key diversity characteristic data so that we can understand this picture. Right now we can see who's coming in for grants and then who is getting them or not getting them, but we don't have a clear picture of all the processes in between. So like who's going to interview or who's going to shortlisting. Additionally, the way we collect diversity data is very UK focused, and Wellcome has ambitions to become a more global funder. So when we talk about race and ethnicity, the categories that we have in our questions are based on the UK experience. How do you think about these questions when you are working in contexts outside of the UK? I think we have to do quite a lot of legwork to be able to ask those questions sensitively, but then also in a meaningful way that fits the context of where you might be funding research. Another short-term goal for us is broadly around how do we influence and train and then hold to account decision makers who are helping us make decisions around funding. So these are our funding committees, shortlisting committees or interview committees. We want to ensure that they're able to address D&I challenges in their meetings, and then we're cooking up some form of inclusive decision making guidance training. We're not entirely sure what it looks like just yet. And I'll talk a little bit more about a project on this in particular, but we want to have piloted new and creative ways to addressing differential grant funding rates for key diversity targets. So we know for particular schemes, if you are Black or from a minority ethnic background, or identify as a disabled researcher or someone with a long-term health condition, generally there's differential grant funding rates for those groups between the majority counterparts. And then in the more senior awards, we see differential grant funding rates between women and men. A big piece of work that'll be coming in the next couple of years is thinking about how we can do pre-application advice in an equitable way. So it's one thing to make sure all of your processes are fair, and that you try to mitigate bias within the process itself. But then I think that's not enough. I think you have to go out to communities that you want to apply to you, and offer some sort of support for that application process itself. So the process itself has been designed from the UK, from Central London, and people's knowledge and experience of that process will be wildly different depending on where they're located and who they are. And another thing that's on here as a short-term goal that we've already actually trialed a little bit is that inclusive research culture principles form a core part of Wellcome's funding decision framework. So in our new schemes, there are questions and criteria around inclusive research culture principles. So I'll briefly talk about two projects and kind of two of these short-term goals. So the first one is around the Wellcome funding committees. So we're doing a couple things currently. We're working with a supplier that's going to develop some bespoke anti-racism training, and then we're going to have the chairs of the shortlisting and interview committees participate in this. We imagine it'll be the chairs of those committees with the Wellcome staff who help those committee meetings happen. And the idea is that you create a cohort of folks who have been thinking about the intersection of anti-racism and EDI in particular with decision making, and then this can kind of nudge how those meetings are run. Additionally, we're thinking about a trial for an open call for committee members to expand who's actually on the committees and who's participating in that decision making for funding. It's one thing to have the committees be representative of who we want to fund, which is, we have diversity targets for our committees themselves. It's another thing to ensure that the people who are on those committees are embodying the principles of what it means to take EDI into consideration when you're looking at a grant, or what it means to take research culture into consideration when you're thinking about a grant. Additionally, later in the fall, we're going to kick off a project where we're rethinking these meetings in general. So how they're run, how they're structured, even to the fine details of where can you maybe find time for adding a few minutes to a discussion, or how can you actually change the process to make it fairer and more equitable. I'll briefly talk about another project we have around reducing funding inequities. So arguably, Wellcome's best known for giving out money via grants, and as I mentioned, we know we have data that we don't do this equitably. Based on the population of people who actually put in applications. So over the last 4 years, there's been a 5 percentage point difference in success rates for minority ethnic applicants in the UK. So that means that if you're from a minority ethnic background, you're 31% less likely to receive funding than a white person. This means that for every 10 white awardees, 63 needed to apply, whereas for every 10 minority ethnic awardees, 92 needed to apply. So what we've decided as a team is that we're going to do a bit of landscaping and scheming. So a team member is leading our project that's looking for interventions in the grant giving process for funders who have a similar problem, and lots of funders within the UK and globally have said they have this problem, and basically want to gather a list of interventions that people have tried across the globe. We're then going to ask the question, can we tailor some of these interventions for Wellcome? So, something that people have done in the US, they've said this is a successful way to reduce that funding gap. Can we tailor some of these interventions for Wellcome? Hopefully the answer is yes. But if the answer is no, what we're going to do is we're going to put together a report that then can be released and hopefully be of use to funders in the UK. So if you're a funder who is having this problem, here are things that other people have done to reduce this funding gap, and funders can see whether or not this will work for them. I'm going to say thanks, and then I'm going to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Diogo. I myself, a BME woman with a hidden disability, on one side, I feel at a disadvantage, and it's not often that I would get tapped on the shoulder to apply for a fellowship, even though I've been told that's the magic word that I need to progress. So thank you to Wellcome for being transparent and brave and being so open about their data on funding and for the work that you are doing. Tom, there is a question for you about, I see we're getting some interference here. If you wouldn't mind muting your mics if you're not speaking. Tom, there'll be a question for you about the attendance of conferences and PGR students. That's higher up if you have a look at those. But Diogo, the most popular question coming in, and it links, I've raised this issue of who gets funding, who gets fellowships. And other funders that I've spoke to, who I won't name, have sort of said, well, the people, the diversity of the people being given awards reflects the diversity of those who are applying. So it almost seems like there's a game of tennis where it goes back to the institutions for not supporting all of their diverse researchers to go forward and put themselves forward to apply. And that links to Eleonora's question, which is, if we want to make change happen, how can we bring the whole sector, not just Oxbridge, but the full sector? I've worked at different institutions who have less money and less staff to make things happen. We're aware this is a complex problem, but how can we work together in multi-agency ways, institutions and funders and researchers, to actually get change to happen, given that I think we are all in a number of different ways experiencing financial changes and hardships, and looks like we will be doing so for the next year or two.
Sure. So essentially the question is, there's a pipeline problem, and it's many different parts of the sector's responsibility to think about how to incentivize people to actually come into a research career. Does that seem like a reasonable assessment of this? Yeah, that's a massive elephant in the room, right? So Wellcome, unhelpfully has a very small remit of institutions that it works with when you think about the variety of institutions within the UK. So there are some things that we as an organization could do to put pressure on those institutions, and then you might have the argument of, okay, well, if Oxford and Cambridge are doing this, other institutions will follow suit. I don't entirely buy that. What I would be much more supportive of, and this is an interesting debate for us as an organization at the moment. So I can give you a practical example, right? So for the Early Career Award, the Royal Society did some landscaping a couple of years ago now around the talent of the UK workforce from a diversity perspective. So who is eligible to apply for Early Career Awards in the Royal Society, which has some overlap between the Early Career Award for Wellcome. I think if you were looking at Black postdocs in particular around the biological sciences, it was about 65 people. And so my job is, how do I increase the number of Black people that get early career awards? But there's 65 people in the UK who can apply to this. I'm using this as a very strong argument for actually funding and support has to go into pipeline style programs. So we at Wellcome are thinking about these really hard at the moment. How do you incentivize programs that are specifically for people from underrepresented backgrounds to get into research careers? As far as trying to influence the wider sector itself, that has to be from like a funder coalition point of view, right? So how do funder coalitions come together, say, we're actually going to put institutional money into this, and with the lens of you prime some of this funding, and then eventually it becomes requirements around numbers of applications that are coming in. That's really crude and off the top of my head, but you know, you could see how you might want to prime it with money and then actually put policy into place.
Thank you, Diego. It's a tough nut to crack, but I'm glad that we're starting to chip away at it. I'm going to turn to Tom for questions that were higher up in the chat, but Diego, just so you are prepared, Jane's asked a question about social class and equality. If you look at that question and prepare for it. Tom, I think there are two questions for you that I've spotted. In doing your work, have you come across this issue about international PhD students or researchers having problems getting visas to travel to conferences and the impact that's had on them? And the other thing is, do you know why, Louise has asked, do you know the rationale for why the cost for visas, the NHS surcharges, you know, for mid-career research, you said it's almost £16,000 to bring a family of 4 over. Do you know how this has come about and why it's increased in that way?
Sure. So so on the first point, I have to admit that this wasn't an issue that was raised to us when we were just talking with members, but it's certainly, I think, yeah, it's a very important issue, and I think definitely going to sort of take it away and look into it. And if anyone wants to follow up on that issue about attending conferences, as I say, we have a meeting with the Home Office later. So if anyone wants to I guess, talk about that, then I would be happy to bring that to as part of the recommendations in the report and bring that to the attention, because it does seem like an interesting, like important issue to address. And sorry not to have more on that. But I think I guess the second question about why, so why are costs so high? So I think, so the majority of the cost is really, the bulk of it is the immigration health surcharge, and that's what makes us so much more expensive than other countries, because other countries don't have this immigration health surcharge. And I think the rationale, it was part of the manifesto commitment, the immigration health surcharge, as you know, contribution to the NHS, but we don't really see why it has to disproportionately affect certain groups like international researchers, and why it should affect, you know, why it should be so, why the total cost has to be paid for upfront rather than over a series of staggered payments. So I think that's the general rationale. But yeah, I guess I couldn't tell you why it is the way it is, but yeah.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think in relation to your answer to the first point about conference attendance, would it be helpful if someone emailed you with a case study, an example?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thanks.
So would you mind putting your email address in the chat so people could contact you and tell you their story, so that can be taken forwards? Diego, back to you, and we've got maybe a minute for your response, and for a very tricky question about class. I mean, how do we even measure it? But your thoughts on this question from Jane, please.
Short answer is yes, we have looked at socioeconomic status as a strand for our work. We picked anti-racism and anti-ableism as the priorities as this new team is getting set up, but that does not mean to say that you don't look at the intersectional nature of everyone's characteristics. Our brilliant colleagues at Equality, Diversity, Inclusion in Science and Health, EDIS, have written guidance for how you can actually ask questions around socioeconomic status as you're collecting diversity data. There's ones in there that are really useful. We now collect this data on our grants, and so we can look at that in the future.
Oh, much more progress than I anticipated that you'd have a response with. Thank you so much, and thank you to Katie for sharing this Twitter thread about an example about conference attendance. That's so helpful. Tom and I are actually meeting tomorrow about this topic, about international researchers. How do we get government to change policies? Who can we get to support us when we're lobbying the Home Office, etc.? So believe me, this is active, this is real. UK RSA back it together with Universities UK. We are really hoping over the next couple of years to make some progress for international researchers. And as you've heard from Diego, really multi-funder agency working together stuff is happening. Lots of good things coming out, Royal Society, Wellcome and others in moving things forward on EDI and research funding. Much needed. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm delighted with your questions and with your attendance and your just learning about what's going on. So for some of you it was new. And have a fantastic lunch break. We are back in 1 hour with another set of terrific terrific sessions coming up in the afternoon. Enjoy your lunch break and feel free to contact any of the three of us if you have anything further that you would like to discuss with us. Take care and have a good break.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.